Right. Like the haircut? Bugs. Outside. Part 2. We move, therefore we think, therefore we are. In this disconnected world, we must champion the physical. Get physical. Physical, 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 physical. Why? Well, let's start with the body. Our vehicle for everything we do in life. I am here. We live embodied lives. Like it or not, you wouldn't be here without your body. We spend our lives in motion, yet rarely pause to reflect upon how our own motion defines and expresses who we are. Anyone who has ever been physically limited through accident or some other unexpected event understands how the sudden inability to physically move in the way to which one is accustomed causes one to undergo a renegotiation of self-identity. It's often accompanied with grief. Certainly anyone who has been at the bedside of a loved one who passes away, or found a recently deceased body, or attended the funeral of a friend or family member, as anyone who's experienced these sad, really difficult times understands, intuitively or consciously, the very stillness of that previously breathing, moving human person disquiets us to the bone, even as it defines death. Movement is essential to our humanity. It is also imperative to our ability to think and communicate. Now, here's a really fun little story. This is all about the small creature of the ocean who, if you reach out to touch it, will squirt you in the eye just like your morning grapefruit. Hence the name sea squirt. Sea squirts start life off as eggs that develop into tadpole-like larvae with a tiny brain of about 300 neurons. The free-swimming, non-feeding tadpoles swim about, and then they attach themselves to something, cementing themselves headfirst to the spot where they will spend the rest of their lives. At this point, they are ravenously, they're like super hungry. So the sea squirt turns around and eats its own tadpole-like parts, including the nutritious little 300 neuron brain. Now demoted biologically, the sea squirt has become the ultimate conch potato. Here's the takeaway. Because the sea squirt no longer needs to interact with the world in any but a most passive way, it no longer requires a brain. Is that wild or what? Because it moved. It had a brain. Recent studies in cognitive neuroscience support the link between the movement necessary for navigation, getting from here to there, and psychological processes such as memory, imagination, adaptability, and overall brain development. So perhaps, Descartes' philosophical insight would be more accurate were it to be modified. I move, therefore I think, therefore I am. Movement not only influences how our brain develops, but how we move actually influences how we feel. If you smile when you are sad, the simple act of using your zygomaticus muscle will lift your spirits. There was a study done. They had people put a pen like that in their mouth, and then they looked at these photos, and they had to tell a story about the photos. So they look at the photos, and the people who had held the pen in their mouth for like a minute, they told happy stories about these photos. Then they had another group of people. They took like golf tees, and they glued them to their eyebrows, and they told those people to try to put the points of the tees like that, hold them together for a minute. And after those people did that, they looked at those exact same photos, and in almost all of the cases, they told a sad story about the photos. How we move influences how we feel. Amy Cuddy, in her extraordinary TED Talk, Your Body Language Shapes Who You Are, dives deeper into the physiology of this phenomenon. In it, she explains that when you hold a superhero pose, you increase your testosterone, your confidence, and decrease your cortisol, or your stress hormone, famous as the fight or flight hormone. It's that one. Cortisol is very good at its job, but extended presence of high cortisol levels in the body can have detrimental effects like muscle wasting and weakening of the immune system. Superhero poses, which increase confidence, are also vulnerable poses. Vulnerable because they're open, they're grounded poses, and they require a big kinesphere. In contrast, fearful poses are guarded, diminished poses. They're very small. We assume that position by default when we are on our phones. So I ask myself, as a dancer, how does this influence our physiology long term? What's going on with our hormones? And consequently, our fundamental sense of self. Next, our physicality is not only fundamental to how we think and how we feel, but also how we communicate. Most of our communication happens non-verbally, anywhere from 55% to 93%. 93% of what we communicate is through body language. Actual words, they account for a whopping 5 to 7% of what we actually communicate. Not much. Even though most communication happens non-verbally, our technological society relies almost exclusively on words, email, texting, Twitter. We take the nonverbal out of the formula, leaving us with a lot to misunderstand, misconstrue, and misuse. Think about that. We think, we feel, and we connect through the movement of our bodies. So any real healing must begin from this fundamental physical place. The New York Times published several years ago, I think, what they call the Joy Workout, which is a workout that integrates movements that elicit joy. Like when you go into them, like jump around, and then you simply feel better for having done that. Now, we do that all the time anyway with exercise, but this is particularly effective because the movements are movements that we do when we feel joyful. So by doing the movements that we do when we feel joyful, we actually sort of go from the outside in and bring a little more joy to our hearts. So take a look at what's along the bottom there. That is the link to the Joy Workout, brought to you by the New York Times.